Welcome, everybody, to the Eat, Pray, Faith podcast with Dr. Tracey. That's me. And today we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic and one that I wanted to provide my listeners due to my high respect of my very special guest today, Dr. Joel Kahn. We're going to be talking about the value of veganism and cardiovascular health and just health in general. So, Dr. Kahn, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I finally got you on my podcast, and I'm always a big fan of yours, as you know.
Very kind of you. I'm happy and excited to be with you. And I love the name of your podcast because that book, Eat, Pray, Love, still remains one of my favorite reads that I've ever had. So if somebody doesn't by chance know what I'm talking about, go enjoy reading that book.
Great book, great movie. Gotta love Julia Roberts, right? It just was such a good movie. And yeah, I was inspired by that because I felt the underlying like spiritualism as well as the passion for life. And I just was like, that's a great thing. I just turned the last word to faith for me. So
Okay.
we have an interesting topic because prior to coming on, Dr. Kahn asked me, am I a vegan? And I have to say, I used to be a vegan. I'm no longer a vegan, but primarily I turned into a vegan because my father couldn't cook steak well. So I think I was a forced vegan because everything he cooked was just completely hockey puck. So I'm not now, but I do like to provide a different perspective. And honestly, I want to learn. I mean, if there is something that I can glean from this or my listeners, absolutely worth it to me. So, Dr. Kahn, can you give us your background, your credentials, just so we can set the precedent for the listeners?
Sure. And I'll be brief, but I grew up in suburban Detroit, and 65 and a half years later, I still live in suburban Detroit, although I didn't think that was going to happen. I entered medical school in Ann Arbor actually at age 18. They had an accelerated program and graduated 6 years later with a medical doctor. Did graduate summa cum laude, found out I had an aptitude for memorizing all kinds of stuff, some of which I still remember, most of which, of course, is either wrong or I don't remember, and always wanted to be a cardiologist. So it was a straight and narrow shot to 1990. At that point, I was what's called an interventional or cath lab cardiologist. I had moved out of the area to Dallas, Texas for 3 years and Kansas City for a year to get what I thought was the best training. I still think it was the best training. And I've been back in Michigan since 1990, a couple of years back in Ann Arbor and suburban Detroit, though I now have offices both in Detroit and in Boca Raton, Florida, kind of a nice setup. I did, again, kind of straight and narrow cardiology, hospital, cath lab, coronary care unit for about 25 years. Very busy, wonderful practice, wrote a lot of research papers, taught a lot of fellows. Even though I was at a private hospital in Detroit, it was a very academic hospital connected to medical schools. So we did a lot of great work, great publications. And then 10 years ago, I had already completed going back for sort of functional medicine training, integrative training, and have been practicing on my own for 10 years in a preventive cardiology clinic called the Kahn Center, licensed in about 25 states, and do a lot of wonderful work. I love what I do. A lot of my peers, I just heard of another one today retiring. I hope we can talk in 10 years, and I still got an office full of people from all over the world, all over the country. It's just wonderful. The only other path worth mentioning, because it's important to the topic, I grew up in a home in Detroit where we kept certain dietary laws called keeping kosher. We didn't eat cheeseburgers and pork. And when I got to Ann Arbor at age 18, it was relatively important to me to keep honoring that. I was pretty steeped in it. And the only solution was the salad bar. So you became vegan because your father was a horrible steak cook. I became vegan because there was nothing but a really pretty amazing salad bar. There was a restaurant in Ann Arbor called the Pretzel Bell with an amazing salad bar. And the last part is my parents around that time went from a traditional family to my mother dragged my father to the Pritikin Longevity Center, which at that time was in Santa Monica, California. And they took classes, and my mother started making lentil loaf instead of meatloaf. So during the week, I was eating the salad bar. The weekend, if I drove 45 minutes home from Ann Arbor, I was eating lentil loaf. And then I read books. I read John Robbins' Diet for a New America. Many people know John Robbins and the Food Revolution Network. And then I read the amazing research of Dean Ornish. And I'd been eating this way and now had raised a family with the option for the children, but many of them, they ate a lot of fruits and vegetables. And, really have always taught patients that food is medicine, nutrition is a fundamental foundation for cardiology, health, and treatment. And it has been with a plant forward focus. For my own life, 100% plant based now for 48 years, literally nothing but plants for 40 years. My wife, too. We were on the same track at the same location all the time. But, I'm very open with my patients. They have to make their own decision. I provide them education. Some, follow the path and really grab onto it. Some come to me already grabbing onto a plant, a vegan, lifestyle, and others have no interest. So we keep them under the fold and hope that one day, I have a lot of faith, as part of the title of your podcast, that at least they'll grab an apple over a donut and a salad over French fries. And that's such a health upgrade, except if the French fries are in beef tallow, they have to be healthy now.
Oh,
No,
oh my.
Robert Kennedy Jr., don't talk about French fries and beef tallow. Teach them how to eat a baked potato, for God's sakes.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole. And, my whole thing is if we can help people be more educated in their choices,
Right.
and I mean, the issue with our entire society, as I feel, I don't know how you feel, but the convenience is just overplayed so much that we have taken food out of the home and put it into restaurants and fast food. And I think that's where primarily the issues start, is that we're not cooking traditionally, like you were. Like you came out of a kosher family. I came out of a bad steak cooker. But, you know, our reasons were different, but it shaped how we then chose next steps in our life. And that's the biggest thing we have to take out, is what you do in the home matters. Uh,
I actually completely agree. The loss of the art and the time to cook, slow cooking and, fresh cooking and, and might have to compromises of batch cooking on weekends and all. And you can find some nice ready to go meals to pick up. You have to be pretty picky about it and all. But I didn't grow up in a fast food home. I didn't grow up in a pepperoni pizza home. And, those lessons stuck with me. And of course, I
mhm.
agree with you. I hope some of the next few years of making America healthy again without political implication is that lesson, spend your dollars at home,
Right.
not to hurt the restaurant industry, but if you're looking for health, it's pretty hard to find it, certainly in the convenience restaurant world. And I'm a former and reformed restaurant owner. I thought that would be a cool combination to be a plant-based cardiologist and a plant-based restaurant owner, and been there, done it, and can talk about it. But um,
Right.
people don't want healthy food in a restaurant. They're in a
Yeah,
restaurant not to be judged, even
that's
though we were providing about the healthiest food on the planet.
Yeah, they don't. They want convenience. They want quick. They just didn't want to cook. So totally get it. Well, let's get into this whole plant-based nutrition that you have kind of built your entire Instagram around. I mean, I follow you on Instagram. You have quite a following there. Your videos are so great.
Thank
Let's talk about, plant-based. Let's talk about with it reversing heart disease. Let's start there. And then we can actually just maybe start at the top and roll down with how does it impact inflammation? Because you're not just, I mean, you are a cardiologist, but you're not just that. You are a longevity practitioner, a preventative cardiologist. You don't just stay within that title. So I watch you and I watch your patients and the people who come to you. So just give me a little insight on what have you seen in all of your years of
you.
practice implementing this plant-based concept?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a personal choice that I've chosen to eat 100% whole food plant-based. I mean, I don't eat Impossible Burgers and Beyond Meat burgers. Once in a while, a new product comes out, and I'll literally try it just to say I tried it. So I tell my patients why they should stay away. But I eat whole food, and that's a personal choice. But one of the reasons I've stuck with it, because I could cook kosher chicken in my home if I wanted to, is the science. And really quickly, I'll just hit maybe 5 bullet points that are all out there, but way back, way back, way back in 1948, 49, 1950 in Los Angeles was a very forward-thinking internal medicine doctor named Lester Morrison, MD. And he had this whole big practice of cardiology patients, and there was nothing really to offer people in the late 40s. There was a lot of heart disease post World War II. All the smokers were coming back, young people having heart attacks. And he actually did a randomized study, not double blinded, of a plant forward, low fat diet. It was a published one-page sheet. Eat this, not that. Would be very similar to Dean Ornish and Joel Furman kind of foods. And the other group, it was 100 heart patients, were just told keep eating like a typical Los Angeles person ate. And he published the data. The weight loss was phenomenal on this plant forward diet. The cholesterol drop, because there were no meds, was like 300 down to 200 with this plant forward diet. And at the end of 12 years, half the plant forward diet people were alive, and 0 of 50 of the standard Los Angeles diet people were alive because there were no bypasses, there were no stents, there were no statins. Aspirin was known. I don't even know if it was being used widely back then. And that caught the attention of Nathan Pritikin, who was an engineer in Santa Barbara, but a brilliant man. And he went down and met with Dr. Morrison. He was about 40 years old. Said, Dr. Morrison, there's this thing called cholesterol in the blood you're checking. Can you check mine? And his, like a typical American, was about 350. And Dr. Morrison had him do a little walking stress test, upstairs, downstairs. Very simple. He actually flunked it. And Dr. Morrison said, here's a sheet of paper. If you don't follow this, you'll probably be dead like the rest of my patients. And he wasn't really a heart patient yet. It was maybe the first preventive program in America. And Pritikin got so excited about it, he kept doing aerospace engineering. But he opened first in Santa Barbara, then in Santa Monica, and now it still exists in Miami as a beautiful preventive wellness clinic, the Pritikin Longevity Center. He started teaching people, but he knew without doctors around, he was going to get pushback. So he got doctors around him. And it was, if you look at what they teach, it's 95% plus whole food plant-based. There is, even to this day, a little bison, a little salmon, and all. But, the power. And then you jump to Dean Ornish, MD, who is a very young medical student, took a semester off and did a study combining whole food plant-based diets, to be honest, with a little egg white and a little non-fat yogurt, because it was 1979, 1980, 1981. There were barely any whole food restaurants, no Trader Joe's. He was worried his people would never stick in the study if they didn't have a little variety of food. And he combined it with yoga, meditation, and group support. And he showed in a study in 1983, nobody remembers, that serious heart patients started to feel better in 3 weeks. And then he did a randomized study. That's the very famous Lifestyle Heart Trial, published in 1990. The year I started practice had a huge influence on me. Oh my God, I can teach heart patients what I've been doing and actually quote them. Peer-reviewed, high-level science, published in Lancet, one of the better journals in the world. But he showed, actually using cardiac catheterization, that blockages very slowly can get better over time with a lifestyle program, but the diet was whole food plant-based forward. And then there's the famous Cleveland Clinic Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who independently developed at the Cleveland Clinic. He went to the surgeons. He actually was a breast and thyroid surgeon, but he's just one of these guys, a huge brain, huge curiosity. And he developed a food program. Ultimately was totally plant-based and actually famous for being very low in fat. He's not a fan even of extra virgin olive oil. I am a fan of extra virgin olive oil. But he went to the surgeons and the cardiologists, give me your worst patients, the ones you can't treat, and let my wife and I cook for them and talk to them, and published, dramatic reversal. He's sort of a folk hero now at age 91 because he's this handsome former Olympic athlete, major surgeon who, is now a preventive doc. And you can add a few people on, Joel Furman and others. That's a famous PBS, a real doctor, but very successful on PBS specials on health. You just can't find that database with any other food program. You can't find it in the paleo, keto, carnivore. You really can't find it in the Mediterranean world. I mean, I'm all a big fan. My patients tell me they're eating a real Mediterranean diet. I got to ask them what that means. Pepperoni pizza is not very common in Naples, Italy. It's a margarita pizza with almost no cheese on it, actually. Or the Mind diet, which is more a brain preventive diet, but they just take the Mediterranean diet and throw more blueberries and walnuts and salmon. Or lately, I really, really like Dr. Walter Longo in general, the gerontology expert at University of Southern California, USC. But he calls it the longevity diet, and he basically took the Mediterranean diet and critically, as the most funded researcher in nutrition in the United States, I mean, a major academic force, cut out all red meat and all chicken and all dairy and left fish and vegetables. Fish about 3 times a week and vegetables all the other meals. I really like Dr. Longo's longevity diet. But you can't even say that's got data to prevent heart attacks, strokes, bypass stents, and all. Whether these prolonged life is always a tougher issue. I mean, there's no doubt if we could really nail it down, the ideal diet for longevity has to involve a lot of colorful, whole, plant-based foods, providing tons of fiber. I'm a big fan of fermented foods. We want to feed our microbiome fiber, fiber, fiber for all the short chain fatty acids and protecting our gut wall and polyphenols like crazy. Those are all the brightly colored fruits and vegetables. Now, whether 10% animal foods, 5% animal foods, what would it look like if we could actually do a 25-year study of all plants versus, nearly all plants? I don't think the ketogenic and the paleo and the carnivore paleo could. There's obviously very healthy versions of the paleo diet. Why does the vegan diet work so well? I mean, number one, it's what it doesn't have. I mean, and let me say, Harvard School of Public Health and others have done a great job doing something called the UPDI, remember, the Unhealthy Plant Dietary Index, and the HPDI, the Healthy Plant Dietary Index. Meaning, if your plant diet is largely processed food, that would be the unhealthy pattern. It doesn't work. It actually may be worse than what the average American is eating. You have to do the HPDI, the Healthy Plant Dietary Index. That's what we're talking about. Well, you eat it, I eat whole foods, hopefully home cooked, brightly colored, some fresh, raw. That's a salad. I mean, eat a giant salad every day, eat a giant green smoothie every day. I'm more a salad guy than a smoothie guy. So you got to do it healthy. But the longevity diet of choice, when the research is done, or maybe AI will solve it for us, has got to involve tons and tons and tons of plants. I don't think it's going to be the all meat diet. It's clearly not the standard American diet. We know that. Why does it work so well? It's, as I say, it's the fiber, it's the, phytonutrients, plant-based nutrients you can't get out of animal products. It's also, it doesn't have the processed junk food if you do it right. Um, Still, the weight of the evidence, controversial, but is that a lower saturated fat diet is more associated with freedom of cardiovascular disease. And plants, with the exception of coconut oil and palm oil, which aren't really plants or processed foods, they're very low in saturated fat. Olive oil, olives, nut seeds all have some. Most of your fruits and vegetables have nearly none. That's where the beef tallow discussion gets in again. Why are we telling America to up their saturated fat content when 99% of academics and a large number of just general cardiologists would agree that avoiding saturated fat is a good idea. So, a vegan diet could be low in saturated fat. It's high in fiber. It's high in plant-based nutrients. I think and this is the last thing I have to say, one of the unsung advantages of a whole food plant-based diet is the vitamin C content. And I've really been a student, particularly in the last 6 months, of reading old literature on vitamin C. And, it's this amazing observation that few people know, that humans are one of the very few species on the planet, like 99.9% of all animals on the planet make their own vitamin C. Dogs, cats, squirrels, elephants, tigers, lions, and bears. Oh my. Humans can't make 1 milligram of vitamin C. We lost the ability 40 million years ago. There's a little enzyme in our liver called GLO, GLO, and we don't have it working anymore. It's there, but it's been turned off. Some people say we were living in the jungle and we had so much access to vitamin C rich tree foods, plants, fruits and veggies, that we had no need to make our own. But we don't live there anymore. And vitamin C is critical for good vascular health because of its important role in producing collagen, the substance that makes every organ an organ, but makes our arteries intact. So we are, relatively vitamin C deficient compared to a dog, which never has a heart attack, or a bear. A bear has a cholesterol of 500 in the winter. They don't have a heart attack. And it's
Right.
an interesting theory promoted more by Linus Pauling, PhD, double Nobel Prize winner, in an article in 1992 called The Unified Theory of Cardiovascular Disease, where he said, it's all due to weak arteries, and the weak arteries are all due to vitamin C deficiency. And I've read that the average American gets about 100 milligrams a day of vitamin C in their diet. The average vegan gets 200 to 300 milligrams. You can get more if you really up the vitamin C rich fruits and vegetables. There's not much in, legumes and whole grains. There's some, but I have been teaching, and it's a different topic. It's not food, but I have most of my patients supplement into the multi-gram level of vitamin C. But even if you just have a big salad every day, have an apple every day, eat an orange, you're going to do better than having another chicken breast or another tilapia fillet where you're not going to get vitamin C at all, essentially.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I remember watching your video on that, on vitamin C. We had lost the enzyme functionality.
Yeah. I want to volunteer. If anybody's listening to this and they have CRISPR-9 technology, take my body and turn that enzyme on. I really would like to see what a human would be like if we were making, it's estimated 10 to 20 grams a day of vitamin C if we didn't lose this enzyme. And when we're sick, you got a cold, a flu, a pneumonia, we may make 30 to 40 grams a day, it's estimated, to compensate. And I do that. I take my multi-gram amount of vitamin C and I double, triple it if I get sick. And I tell you, 12 hours later, you're not sick anymore. So, just a few little tips from an old, natural oriented cardiologist.
Right. Don't be scared of good nutrition, right? I think
Right,
people will call me and say, well, isn't that too high? And I'm like, no, because if you actually had correct levels, you wouldn't be sick right now.
right.
So kind of
Correct.
a reminder. Well, you unpacked a lot, and I have a few questions because, I'm going to play devil's advocate today. There's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff
And
on
do ask me about inflammation because I didn't mention that specifically, but
questions listed. But I do want to know, what do you think a plant-forward diet does with hormones? I think a lot of men, and here's what I found out about researching peptides. Lentils are one of the best forms of a peptide that
right,
helps you attain muscle mass, right?
right.
That's where strong comes from, which is a patented peptide that is made from lentils. And so I always
Is
use that.
that Peptostrong? Is that what you just said? Right. Yeah. Familiar with that. Yeah.
So I always use that as an example of like, I don't care if you're a vegan, you get your macros that way. Just make sure you're getting complementary, your B12 levels are good.
Right.
Who's more compliant that you
So, you are bringing up good points, and there's a lot of trails to go down, but um,
go down?
many people would argue, and I'll bring up the name of Dr. Walter Longo again, that it's very hard to dot every I of nutrition with food alone. Therefore, supplementation has a role. Now, of course, there are anti-supplement people in the academic world. There's not too many anti-supplement people in the natural health world. But a person like me that eats nothing but plants should be aware that obviously the famous ones, and B12 is the most famous, either get your blood level checked after 3 to 6 months of eating this diet, or just take a B12 supplement, sublingual, oral. You don't need shots unless you have pernicious anemia. That's kind of crazy. Look at vitamin D levels, but everybody should look at vitamin D levels. Look at omega-3 levels. I think that's the one people miss. Omega-3 sufficiency, and I try and get it through chia, flax, hemp, walnuts, chlorella, spirulina. But I like ALA, but I still got to convert my ALA over to EPA, DHA. Check that. Check your homocysteine level. If you're not getting enough B12, your homocysteine level may go up. You should be getting enough folate if you're eating big salads, leafy greens. Magnesium should be more abundant in a plant-based diet, but it's the soil quality and the rest. So either check a magnesium level, or I take magnesium before bed and trying new ones all the time, different threonates and different glycinates and different acetates. But at any rate, there are some companies out there making multivitamins for vegans, makes it very simple, all in one, or just be aware of it. But the broader topic is our government says most people over age 50 should take vitamin B12 for their brain and nerve health, whatever their diet is. And those of us in the functional medicine world that do extensive lab panels know most people have one, two, three, four very easily identifiable vitamin deficiencies. And then if you get into the what's called, and it's not a term I ever used till a couple of months ago, the orthomolecular world, which is the high dose vitamin C world and the high dose vitamin B6 world and the high dose vitamin B3 niacin world, with fascinating data. It's not just about avoiding deficiency, it's about hitting optimal targets, which could be really quite high, like vitamin C, really quite high. So the vitamin replacement approach is a common soft belly for veganism. Well, you guys got to take a vitamin. Well, I don't find there much of an argument. None of them are expensive or particularly dangerous. You might have yellow urine from riboflavin, but it's kind of cool.
Right.
I always want to be more yellow than the guy next to me in the public bathroom. I got
Yes.
it, baby. And then let me just say inflammation. Generally a whole food plant-based diet should be a low inflammation diet. Of course, you can check blood tests like high sensitivity C-reactive protein. There is a randomized study published, I think it was 2018, out of maybe it's New York University. It was one of the Manhattan hospitals, of heart patients given a standard American Heart Association diet or a plant-based diet. The endpoint, 12 weeks or so, was high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And it did fall on a kind of an Ornish style, low fat, whole food plant-based diet. It didn't fall in the course of the weeks on the others. So we at least have some actual academic data that, there's many reasons you have inflammation, your dental health and your heavy metal burden and your sleep apnea. But from a food standpoint, this should be a rather anti-inflammatory diet if you don't have a food allergy to something, you didn't identify.
So you shouldn't be a pastatarian.
Yep. Right.
Talk to me a little bit about hormones and
Yeah.
plant-based diet, because I think it's
Yeah.
right. Men with their testosterone, women with hormone balance. And then I want to get into a little bit of insulin resistance and metabolic health, because that always the big,
Yeah. Right. The big one.
what
So,
everybody is
so
protein.
I check a fair number, extensive thyroid panels, a lot of male and sex female hormone panels on my patients. Certainly if there's symptoms, but sometimes otherwise, just as part of a health and wellness check. Yeah, I think the literature doesn't say there's any there's two issues: eating plant-based and hormones and eating a low-fat plant-based diet and hormones. I work with very good, very famous functional medicine doctors around even the Detroit area who tell me, boy, you got Mr. Smith's cholesterol down to 125 with your plant-based diet, and he can't make enough pregnenolone to support his hormone pathways. And I told him back off and add in lamb. And I've said, where's that data that a whole food plant-based diet drops your pregnenolone and your whole cascade of hormones? And honestly, the answer was, well, somebody told me it happens. And from the person this came from, and I'm going to keep my lips zipped on, who I was rather surprised there wasn't an academic, publication reference. Word of mouth isn't enough when you're teaching doctors around the world. So I don't see it. I mean, I see lots of guys with very low testosterone panels and all, but they're of any diet, and it's usually really unclear. One yesterday, he's a Mediterranean eater, but there's plenty of fish and chicken in his diet. Total testosterone's 220, and he's got some symptoms, so I'm getting him referred out for proper hormone replacement therapy. I don't see it. I mean, I would say the best doc who's written on this is Dr. Neil Barnard, MD. He's in Washington, D.C. He's head of an organization called Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine. He's a very plant-based doctor, but he's very academic. He writes he funds some of the best double-blind randomized food studies that are coming out, 16-week studies on insulin resistance, on weight. But he's got a book out about plant-based diets and hormonal status. And there's a lot of women, PCOS, PMS, menopausal hot flashes, particularly if you're not soy adverse, organic soy products. There are a lot of benefits of phytoestrogens, not animal estrogens, on a lot of these syndromes. There's data about men with erectile dysfunction. I'll go back to Dean Ornish, data, Dr. Esselstyn data. There's actually an ongoing randomized study at Montefiore Medical Center in New York on whole food plant-based diets, like an Ornish type diet, on male erectile dysfunction, but the study's underway. There's no results to report. But there are certainly many examples of erectile function coming back. We haven't talked about it, but a benefit of a very plant-strong diet or plant-only diet is more dietary nitrates to make more nitric oxide via your oral pathway if you don't use Listerine and you don't use Scope and you don't use fluoride toothpaste, and you shouldn't use those three products. And if you're not on a acid blocker like Protonix and Nexium, because if you're not on the acid blockers and you're not on the Scope and you're not on the fluoride toothpaste, if you eat a big salad, you make a lot of nitric oxide, and you can see guys' erectile function return just with diet alone. So that's the old, nitric oxide pathway. So that's a hormone pathway too, indirect.
Yeah. I usually tell men, ED is a combination of vascularity, nitric oxide, and insulin resistance.
Yeah, correct.
Your first signs of cardiovascular disease.
Right.
And, going back to the hormone pathway, whether you eat a lot of protein, a lot of fat, or whole plant food diet moving forward, the stress that most people are under is really what creates the hormone disruption at the core, right?
Right.
Because it's a cortisol dominant environment within the body, which is going to steal your pregnenolone. It's going to steal your progesterone. It's going to use that to create cortisol versus creating DHEA and your androgens and your testosterone, and for women, your estrogen. So there's a lot more than just this diet creates great hormones, but I like to address it just so people have a path as to what would adding in more plant-based nutrition do for you, right? Just like you said, nitric oxide. It's interesting you mentioned Listerine and PPIs. I mean, I think you just eliminated 88% of the United States. Probably they're all like, oh no, because
Yeah.
that's top four.
It is a very, very high percentage that have got some reason that they're blocking their body's ability to make optimal nitric oxide. And it won a Nobel Prize in medicine. There's just no easy blood test. There's no pharmaceuticals. So we ignore, a pathway in the body that promotes health throughout the body, not just the heart, but brain, sexual health, vascular health everywhere. And um, uh, we could do it with diet and a couple little modifications, like we just said. Yeah.
Well, let's go down the cholesterol path. It's a big topic today. I see a lot of people talking about it. I personally look at cholesterol and I ask more questions. I'm not always trying to repress it. For me, I'm looking at, why is that cholesterol elevating? Is it vascular damage? Is it a need for brain regeneration? Is it a hormone imbalance?
Yeah.
What is it? But we're getting really granular on the testing. And so I would like, if you would, as a professional in the space of cardiovascular health, explain to us how you look at cholesterol. And then can we get into APOB and what that means, particle size, because there's just so many questions that come around it if you don't.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I spend a third of my life ordering lab panels, big lab panels on patients, and looking at them and reporting them back to patients with recommendations. And some of it reading what's new, what's the latest science. Certainly the traditional, and everybody knows it's a traditional cardiology a framework for about 7 decades, maybe 5 decades, 1970s, 1980s, is the higher the level of LDL cholesterol, the greater the risk. And risk is the key word, because risk doesn't mean you're going to get the condition. And talk about risk of atherosclerosis, risk of coronary heart disease, risk of heart attacks, bypass stent, sudden death. The greater the LDL cholesterol, the greater the risk. We know that in the plaque of diseased arteries, you will find cholesterol. That's undeniable. You don't find a lot of other things like sugar, which may be a very bad thing to eat in excess, but you find cholesterol. And there's just so many studies that there's a straight line between the higher the LDL. But when you get down to one patient in your clinic, I can tell you from, hundreds of thousands of patients, terrible lab values and no disease, and relatively modest lab values and disease. So it's not, the line may be straight when you've got 30 studies in a meta-analysis, but on a single patient, it's very difficult to know. And you got to test the patient. I'll talk about that in a second. And of course, we used to say, of course, HDL, high density lipoprotein, the protective, the one that did something called reverse cholesterol transport. Low HDL was bad, so we call it the happy, healthy cholesterol, because high was good. But in the last 10, 15 years, there's without a doubt complete confusion about HDL, because high is also a risk. I see people in my clinic all the time. I saw one yesterday with an HDL of 135. Now, some people will say there's something wrong with that person. Maybe it's a response to chronic silent infection. Well, this person doesn't seem to have that. It's clearly genetic also. And she just had a major heart attack. So HDL is now a sweet spot. We don't want too low. We don't want too high. We don't have a drug that modifies it. So most of us ignore HDL right now because there just is confusion and lack of therapeutic clarity. We don't really know that we want to lower it, and there's no really effective way to lower it. The one we have to mention, everybody has to have their lipoprotein little a cholesterol checked, a genetic cholesterol that's on every lab slip panel, LabCorp, Quest, hospital panels. But it's the particle that everybody needs to know, and nobody gets checked. Maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of clinicians will order it because it's therapeutic nihilism. What do we do about it? We don't have anything to do about it. In reality, that's what I do. I'm sort of a lipoprotein A guru. I see people all over the world with that. There's a lot you can do for it. And we don't have drugs yet. We will have drugs in the next 5 years. Many studies ongoing. Hopefully they'll be helpful because we need ways. I have patients who've had massive heart attacks, strokes, open heart surgery solely because they inherited from their parents lipoprotein little a, and they need a really powerful therapy that works. And yet, same thing, it's a risk factor. I have 78-year-old patients who've got sky-high lipoprotein A levels, meaning they've had it since birth, and they don't have any disease. So you just got to unpack people one by one. So, I don't promote any particular lab. Dr. Mark Hyman has introduced the functionhealth.com, $500 extraordinary lab panel, but it has lipoprotein A in it. So my office phone rings a lot because people are finding out. And mylifeforce.com, I think, offers labs like that. Life Extension has offered labs like that for decades. You can find out, and you should know. And then you can do the advanced lipid particles. I still do them on everybody because it's really just a couple extra dollars. So instead of knowing total cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and LDL cholesterol, I think I didn't mention, you get LDL particle number. You can have 2 people with an LDL cholesterol of 120. One is lean, exercises, eats clean, and one does the opposite. And by doing the advanced cholesterol panel, you can see significant differences. If you look at the LDL particle number, one person with an LDL of 120 doesn't have that many particles in the blood, but the particles that are there are all chock full of cholesterol. So the LDL particle number is pretty low. And studies say that person's at lower risk for atherosclerosis than the other LDL 120, not such a great lifestyle, probably insulin resistant person who has a small little and very prolific number of LDL particles. So you have LDL particle of 801 and 2200 in the other, and the one with the 2200 LDL particle number is a greater risk. And there's certainly a few large long-term studies that say the LDL particle number performs much better than LDL cholesterol. ApoB is a great test. It's a blood test, apolipoprotein B. Costs a few dollars. It's been around for 30 to 40 years. And there are certain people like the famous Dr. Thomas Dayspring, MD, a lipid expert in New Jersey, that have been talking about this for decades. But every LDL cholesterol particle in the blood has an ApoB lipoprotein encircling it. But also of key importance, every lipoprotein A particle in the blood has an apolipoprotein B encircling it. So by one number, you can measure the two most atherosclerotic particles that might be in the blood. 25% of people have both. So I track apolipoprotein B in everybody, but particularly in the 20 to 25% of people that we identify have inherited lipoprotein little a. And if I do an intervention, maybe I start extended release niacin, maybe we start hormone replacement therapy, maybe we put in a food and exercise program, maybe, God forbid, we add a statin, which does not work for lipoprotein little a, but sometimes is needed because of other pressing cardiac issues. Following and tracking the ApoB is the best way to know if we probably benefited or did not benefit that patient.
Interesting. Talk to me about niacin and the impact on those numbers.
Yeah, niacin is a little pet project of mine. Talk about it for a long time, but briefly, it is vitamin B3. Some people argue it's not a vitamin. Some people argue it's an amino acid because if I remember, you can make some niacin in the body from tryptophan. It has this distinctive reaction of causing, if you take enough of it, particularly if you take plain niacin, it releases prostaglandins in the skin, and there's a hot flush that might last 10 minutes, 30 minutes. Some people enjoy it. I kind of like it. Some people do not enjoy it. And once in a while, it's more than a flush. You can get a rash from niacin. But a very safe drug that in 1955 was discovered during studies that were being done to use high-dose niacin for schizophrenia and mental health, which works. It's published. There's books written on it. It was used widely in the 50s and 60s, but when prescription drugs like Haldol came out, orthomolecular psychiatry sort of fell out of favor. There's still people doing it. But it was discovered in 1955 that it lowers cholesterol, and it does everything right. It lowers total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides a lot, raises HDL cholesterol, and it took a few more decades, but about 20 years ago, it lowers lipoprotein little a. So it's about the only single pill out there that hits all those targets favorably with a very safe liver profile. It can raise homocysteine a little bit. I track it, but it's been very minor. It doesn't do much to blood sugar. Some people ask that question, but so I still use a lot of extended release niacin, particularly in my lipoprotein A patients, and it can be dramatic. We don't have a long-term outcome study, so I have to tell people I don't know that this is going to reduce your future risk of heart attack and stroke, but man, I sure made your numbers on paper look a whole lot better, and you're feeling fine, and it's costing you 25 cents a day instead of some other, not so reasonable number. So I still think there's a role for niacin. There's an interesting old data about using non-flushing niacin for degenerative arthritis. So we do some of that in my clinic. You got to read these old papers. Yeah, the real lab testing, though, and it's not lab testing, people need to know their arterial age. They need to get a really good carotid ultrasound called a CIMT ultrasound, which is hard to find. And although I do not like CT scans, there is a $100 coronary artery calcium CT scan, which is the equivalent philosophically of a mammogram or a thermogram or a colonoscopy. You feel fine, but are you at age 45 to 50 developing early signs of a disease that we can jump in and try and squash or reverse with a lot of what we've talked about? So if you have a high cholesterol and a high lipoprotein A, but your carotids and your heart arteries are clean, I'm very permissive. And I look for, root causes. Can't always find root causes. Genetics is a lot of it. it's 100% of it for lipoprotein little a. And if you're developing, early atherosclerosis, we got to really work hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are your top plant-based foods you would say to our audience today that every person needs to eat more of?
Yeah.
Healthy.
I'm going to steal two acronyms because they're so good. Dr. Joel Furman created an acronym G-BOMBS. Some people have heard of it. G for greens, B for beans, O for onions and mushrooms. Well, M's for mushrooms. B's for berries, and S is for seeds and nuts. GBOMBS. That's not all you eat, but that would provide a lot of these critical phytonutrients and fiber. And one of my favorite health gurus is Dr. Russell Jaffe in Washington, D.C., Virginia. He's got one at GGOB, ginger, garlic, onion, brassica, because those are sulfur-rich foods. And that may not only augment your nitric oxide production, your immune health. So ginger, garlic, onion, brassica. Well, brassica being broccoli and, kale and bok choy and Brussels sprouts and all those wonderful things.
Right, all the foods nobody eats. So, as we finish up the podcast here, what do you think is the biggest misconception about heart disease prevention?
Sadly, most people still don't realize that it is preventable and reversible. It's not perfectly reversible. You're not, well, I can't make your bypasses disappear, your stents disappear, but you can shrink plaque. There's no doubt about it. And you can prevent plaque. The earlier in life you start, the better. Even if you've been handed a genetic high risk profile, you can hugely influence it by, we've talked about food, but obviously sleep and don't smoke and good fitness and stress management and optimal nutrition and the rest. So that sadly, people, 98% of my patients coming to see me the first time have seen cardiologists and have never gotten 5 seconds on nutrition. I just have them watch Forks Over Knives. I have good dietitians in Detroit. I don't employ them. Here, watch What the Health, watch Forks Over Knives, read a book, and let's have a little discussion. Listen to Tracey's podcast, do something. But, don't wait for your cardiologist or primary care doc to probably give you a nutrition seminar. I hope that improves in the future.
Yeah, me
Certainly
too.
a misconception. Soy, the whole soy topic, I don't know where you stand on that, but largely phytoestrogens are not dangerous. The substances found in soy and some other products, and they seem to have some pretty protective aspects. That's a
Yeah.
second one comes to mind.
Well, that's an interesting topic. Probably we could go down a whole rabbit hole
right.
there. That started with the entire, estrogen dominance, breast health. But I see as we move forward, Dr. Jen Simmons, who is a
Right.
former surgeon, she's a good friend of mine. She's going to be on the podcast later. But, her entire functional medicine practice now is all about breast health. And she's a big proponent of soy.
Right.
Big.
Yeah. Yeah. I've interviewed her. She's interviewed me, and I agree with her. I would say number three, and I'm done. Whole grains. People like Bill Davis and David Perlmutter are wonderful people, but they made people grain phobic. And for many of us, well, forget about how I feel eating whole grain. The research says over and over, longevity foods, nuts and seeds, legumes, and whole grains go around the world. It's the same equation. Actually, fruits and vegetables come up lower on the list than nuts and seeds, legumes, and whole grains. So if you like Ezekiel bread or you make a homemade whole wheat bread, I tell my patients, go for it. It's
Right.
more fiber, more short chain fatty acids, more butyrate, all the good stuff.
There's more danger in how our raw ingredients that we're using to cook are processed and poisoned versus the food itself that, I always say we're so foodophobic now. We just put people in food prisons and we're like that, we think we're good practitioners. And that's not what every person needs. What works for one doesn't work for another. And I have clients right now that I'm thinking of that I'm going to go back and say, from listening to Dr. Kahn, I think you need niacin. And after listening to Dr. Kahn, I think you should explore a vegan or at least plant-based diet
Right.
because of the numbers, and they're not moving. So
Right.
A good practitioner is going to take in the knowledge and turn it into a powerful play.
Mm.
It's about me thinking one way and you thinking one way. It's what works and what does the science say? So I do appreciate that you are always well researched. I can count on you to bring 3 or 4 studies to any you talk about, which
Thank you.
we need to have that because there's a lot of influencers, and I look at you as an influencer, Dr. Kahn. I mean, you have a really wide reach, but there are many influencers out there that A, are not a clinician. They don't sit in the chair with people. They're not looking at functional testing. They're just saying things. And number two, they have no science to back it. Nothing.
Yeah.
It's just opinion. So I think that is where a lot of the confusion is now coming in with a lot of people that are trying to be healthier.
Right.
So I do appreciate that's how you process.
Thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast.
Absolutely. So how can people find you? Are you taking new clients and
Yeah.
patients? Also, do you have any resources, books, anything where we can find out more about your research?
I usually have some of my books in my study, but one of my kids has taken over my study for a couple months, so I don't have anything to show and tell. But yeah, I take new patients from about 25 states, all the big ones: California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Michigan, Ohio, all the ones around here. drjoelkahn.com, drjoelkahn.com. There's a link to my podcast, my blog, but my clinic, and I love patient care. Yeah, my colleagues are retiring and I'm just gearing up, just getting going.
Just going to open a few more clinics, right? Well, I'll put your link in the show notes plus any other resources that you have, including your books, so that people can find out
Thank
more
you. Yeah.
over your 40 plus years in the industry. And I want to say thank you so much for your heart and for your faith and for just being there and, taking a different approach to preventative cardiology than what we see in mainstream medicine, which I really think we need. So, God.
Thank you. Be well.
All right, you too. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast and also to any other social channels. Make sure you connect with Dr. Kahn because he's always such a wealth of information. And thanks for joining us today. God bless.